What's up, everybody? I'm John Middlekauff. You know what I need you to do. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We got content for days reacting to every NFL game all the time, every single day. Subscribe, like the videos. Let's go. What is going on, everybody? How are we doing? Hopefully everyone is doing well out there on the streets, out there in the real world, and enjoying life. But today we are going to kind of dive into the aftermath of the New York Giants signing Russell Wilson, in regards to them, what it means for the draft, and something I think we need to be careful when these signings happen about big picture conclusions being made about the future. Couple different thoughts on we got the Sweet 16 over the next couple days on Thursday and Friday. So I wanted to dive into a couple things. Obviously, NIL and the death of the little guy is a hot topic out there, and I kind of want to give my 2 cents. And I also think when it comes to specific coaches, Dan Hurley is just getting crushed for the way he acted last weekend. And I just have some thoughts overall on college coaches, especially in football and in basketball, how different they are from the pros, and how it's important to have guys like Dan Hurley be a little crazy. And then I saw a headline today that J.J. Watt will take over for Charles Davis, longtime CBS guy who I think is ultimately going to move to college, but will work with Ian Eagle and be the number 2 guy on CBS. So us football consumers and watchers, I mean, I like many of you, watch a lot of football come the fall. So JJ will be in our lives, and I want to give a couple quick thoughts on that as well. But before we dive into some football, I got to tell you about my friends, my partners, and the official ticketing app of this podcast. Here's the thing. I didn't even realize this. You never know with baseball. Like with football, for 2 months exactly what time, who is playing on that opening Thursday night. And now we got the international Friday night. You are just hit over the head with it, right? And same thing with college football. It's like, we're going to Ireland. Get your tickets. Baseball just kind of comes out of nowhere. It's like, wait, they've already played some games, and then opening days tomorrow. It's like, it's hard to, but luckily they play every day for like 7 straight months. So if you want to go to a game, if you want to go to a playoff game for basketball, for hockey, if you can make it to the Final Four, if you want to go to any big event, concert as well, comedy show, you name it, I got you covered. Game Time, best ticketing app I've ever used. Like I said, I'm not just saying this, I've lived it. I've gone to more events over the last 2.5 years than I have the majority of my podcast career. Because most of my podcast career, unlike my radio career, has been I'm just reacting off television. Haven't gone to as many games, haven't gone to as many events. That is not the case. Once Game Time got involved, got out of the house, just enjoyed myself. Did it for fun, and cannot recommend it enough for you guys. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code JOHN for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code JOHN for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. It happens every single year, and I am guilty as anybody out there, is when a signing happens, when a lot of money gets thrown at a player in free agency, because free agency typically is somewhere in the middle of March, and obviously the draft is not for another month and a half later, is that we all make plans for that given team because of that signing and what they will and will not do. Even though we learn, if not every year, every other year, that early in a draft, the impact of those signings tend not to have as big of like financial implications on who they're actually going to select. I mean, they have financial implications on your cap and how much money your owner has to spend, but of the decision, ultimately your GM, your head coach, and your owner is going to green light. And we just saw it last year when Kirk Cousins got that enormous contract from the Atlanta Falcons. There was not a human being alive outside of that Atlanta Falcons building that ever once uttered the words of, yeah, they're going to take a quarterback. Not one. It's why, honestly, when that draft pick happened, it's still one of the more shocking things that we've seen in recent memory. And a large reason for that was, wait, you just guaranteed him, no matter what, $90 million. And after a couple of weeks ago, they've paid him now $100 million over the course of, 12 months, right? And that's what he's going to make no matter what, $100 million. So I think we got to be very careful of putting the pieces of the puzzle together just based on what happens in free agency because it doesn't tell you that much. Sometimes in life, like if she doesn't text you back for 3 or 4 days, guess what? She's probably not into you. If you have to call someone constantly and text them constantly and email them for money they owe you and they will not return any of your messages or calls, guess what? You're probably not getting that money. And if you really want it, you're going to have to be willing to go to court. Because guess what? The biggest lie that's ever been told in American history is the checks in the mail. So you can put pieces together with a lot of things in life. I think with football, we have to be very careful of the New York Giants have signed Russell Wilson to what? $10.5 million guaranteed. Now they're not going to take a quarterback? Now, who knows? Maybe they were never that enthralled with any of these quarterbacks in this draft with pick number 3. That is very possible, right? We learned last year because of Hard Knocks, they were very into Jaden Daniels and Drake May. They had no opportunity to draft either. Why? Because those teams weren't going to do a deal with them, right? But we have no clue as we sit here as I'm recording this on March 26th, whether they even like Shedeur Sanders, whether they think he can be a starting quarterback for them. I assume that, and I think a lot of people do, but we don't know. Who knows? Maybe Brian Daboll's favorite player in this draft is Will Howard or Riley Leonard. And his GM, which we're not quite sure quite understands or is good at his job, keeps telling him, bro, we can get this guy in the 3rd round. Let's just take another player there. So when you look at that move, if you just want to go off the assumption, which I think is very dangerous, okay, they're not going to take a quarterback. That they end up taking, because he falls right in their lap, Travis Hunter, who I think it's fair to say, even with Abdul Carter, who I think everyone would agree, quarterback is a more valuable position. But the best 2 players in this draft are Abdul Carter and Travis Hunter. And I also think it's fair to say that Travis Hunter is the best pure player in this draft, right? If everything was equal, he would be the number 1 pick without hesitation. And Abdul Carter would easily be the number 2 overall pick. But think about the owner when he was sitting there with Joe Shane and he looked at and he said about Saquon Barkley. And it's funny, everyone pushed back on this. Like, why is he talking about the business angle of Saquon Barkley? Because he can't imagine his best player, who's his most talented player by a country mile, going to a division rival who is actually good and then playing well. And what happened? It was even way worse than that. He had one of the greatest seasons in the history of the league. So it was a double whammy. The Giants sucked, and they lost their number 1, I would say, jersey seller and most important player with the fans. Like, if you're going to suck, at least have a couple important players. Ask the Detroit Lions in the 90s. Yeah, wasn't a great decade, but we had Barry freaking Sanders. So if you're John and you go, like, you got to be pretty realistic. You've won some Super Bowls. You've had some good teams. You had some bad teams. You got to kind of acknowledge, like, listen, our quarterback situation, Russell Wilson, Jameis, even if we draft some rookie, whether at 3 or whether in the 2nd or 3rd round, is by far the worst in our division. It's not even really close, right? I mean, even if we just assume, even if I go, hey, Jaden Daniels, Jalen Hurts, and Dak Prescott, they're both going to miss, or all 3 of them are going to miss a couple games. So the amount of starts those 3 guys are going to make are 14 or 15 starts throughout the 17-game season. You still wouldn't hesitate to take all those guys. Like the Giants, I would argue their quarterback room currently, right now, as we sit, a month before the draft, is bottom 2 or 3 in the NFL. Like Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston, both of them are bottom, 6, 7 quarterbacks as, 32 starters in the NFL. You could argue Jameis would be one of the worst, and Russell's somewhere probably between 22 and 25. So when you combine those guys, it's not like you get some dynamic player. Russell's pretty meh, and Jameis has, I would say, he can be a more explosive player, I feel like, but he also throws a ton of turnovers, ton of interceptions. I mean, he had 12 picks last year. Like he will throw the ball to the other team, but he also has some moments where you're like, God, is he a top 10 quarterback? Like Russell no longer has that. And I think when you look at the money that they spent on these two guys, it shows you. They basically combined two humans to equal a bridge quarterback. Because who knows? Russell was a little more expensive, but combined, they make a little under $15 million. Last year, Gardner Minshew got $15 million. But if I was John Mara, it's like, okay, if we're not going to take Shedeur, uh, let's take Travis. And all of a sudden, we got a couple really young, dynamic players that, whether this season goes really poorly and I got to fire some people, I do have some building blocks with these two players. And the betting odds have now shifted to looking like Travis Hunter is going to be the number 3 overall pick. And some people thought that, like, oh, they got signals that the Cleveland Browns are going to take Shedeur Sanders. It's like you think Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry are getting on the horn with Dable and Shane and telling them their plans? Like, give me a break. That's not why they made the decision. I think it's pretty clear they have no shot at Aaron Rodgers. You have to have a contingency plan. Like, and I would recommend that to any human in life. It helps, to have some different avenues to fall back on if something doesn't work. Obviously, just having Jameis Winston is not good enough. And they told you that by what they paid him. They paid him $4 million guaranteed in 2 years, $8 million. Like, that is the ultimate backup quarterback contract. And honestly, it's a tradable contract. So if they end up drafting a quarterback and they go, you know what, we'll go with Russell and Jackson Dart or Will Howard or whoever. I'm just throwing out random Kyle McCord. You could probably trade Jameis Winston or keep all three of them just because how poor and bad their quarterback room has been these last couple years. It's been a complete embarrassment. I also think this would bring into play, and who knows, Spytek has a lot of different experience with a lot of different quarterbacks, but Pete Carroll, once upon a time, signed Matt Flynn to a contract and then drafted in the third round Russell Wilson and had an open competition because Pete's whole thing is compete, compete, compete. Well, Tom Brady and Shedeur Sanders have been friends and close now 4 years. Shedeur Sanders has been pretty outspoken about like his interest in being on the Raiders. Now, that doesn't matter anything coming from the player. Like it matters ultimately what Pete, what Spytek, what Brady and Mark Davis and the operation want to do. But if you tell me that Shedeur Sanders, the Giants are not going to take him, and if we assume Adam Schefter said today on ESPN, like Abdul Carter is going to be the pick at 2. So if you go Cam Ward, Abdul Carter, let's give the Giants Travis Hunter. Will you go the New England Patriots aren't taking Shedeur Sanders at 4. We know the Jacksonville Jags just gave their quarterback $200 million. They are definitely not taking Sanders at 5. He would be in the heavy discussion to be drafted right there. And honestly, like from his skill set, not the greatest arm. He probably makes more sense playing in a dome than he would outdoors in Cleveland or outdoors in New York. If I was Travis, or excuse me, if I was Shedeur, or if I was advising him, I'd be like, long term, big picture, I think we might be better off playing in a controlled environment, in Vegas. Plus having a proponent, Tom Brady, who now owns the team, who is extremely close with you and your family, who's not going anywhere. I mean, the one thing about being drafted, we get this question a lot that, some of these guys that get drafted really high, part of the reason everything fails is because you go to terrible teams. The Jacksonville Jags, it feels like draft really high every single year. Why? They're a terrible organization. For whatever reason, post Tom Coughlin and Eli Manning, the Giants have been a fucking mess. And they draft high all the time. And they run through coaches like Leo runs through girlfriends. And you see some of these organizations, it's like when you go there, it's very, very hard to overcome the dysfunction. I don't care who you are. There are only so many people in the history of this sport that are like Peyton Manning that probably would have overcome absolutely anything because he basically can just turn into his own coordinator. But like looking back, like what did he really have to overcome in Indy? His general manager is a Hall of Famer. Say what you want, like their defense was hit or miss at different times during his career. They did a hell of a job of getting him skill guys. Like they were pretty good at that with, in Indianapolis. So some of these players, like If you tell me who's the best player at quarterback in this draft, there's a very decent chance it happens like, the guy the Rams took in the second round. Why? Because you get the Rams and McVay and less need infrastructure. Guess what? They're going nowhere. Do you think it's just random that Brock Purdy, Mr. Irrelevant, hit? Of course not. He got to go to the 49ers, a team that had established star players and a star head coach who's also the play caller. You think if Brock Purdy had just gone to some crappy team, he looks the same? Of course not, because that's not usually the way it works. So sometimes falling in the draft can actually financially benefit you big picture. Like, is there any chance Lamar could have busted? Probably not. He's just too talented. But I do think it's fair to say that his career he dramatically benefited, and so did they. But I'm just saying, like, the course of his stardom and becoming like, guy's going to go to the Hall of Fame, and he's going to be considered not just one of the best players of his generation, but like I would say one of the most unique players in the history of the league, who gets to win every single year. Now the playoffs is a hump they have to get over, but like getting drafted by the Ravens at pick 32. Baker Mayfield went to the Browns. How did that work out? Sam Darnold, Jets, obviously not well. A couple years later, starting for the Vikings, then gets $100 million from Seattle. It's usually the way it works for a lot of these guys, even the ones that resurrect their career, is they got to bounce around. Well, some of these guys, Patrick Mahomes, it's like, God, the Bears should have drafted him instead of Trubisky. Well, thank God for Mahomes, they did not, because he got to go to the Chiefs and Andy Reid, right? Josh Allen, well, thank God if you're him, the Browns and the Jets did not select you, and you fall to 7, and Brandon Bean, and Sean McDermott trade up to draft you. Changed your life. Obviously, it takes two to tango. Like Josh Allen is bringing a lot to the table too, but do you think Josh Allen turns into Josh Allen if he's with Cleveland? If he's with the Jets? No chance. It doesn't mean that ultimately he wouldn't have figured it out and become a stud, but there is no way these guys' careers look the way they do without going to where they ended up going. Instability, knowing the people that know what they're doing. What's lucky? Like the biggest difference, obviously, if you're a pro athlete, getting drafted higher means more money, but you know, really the majority of money these guys make is in their second and third contracts. Like the reason Josh Allen is going to be worth hundreds of millions of dollars is not that rookie contract. Not saying that it's not great, and that I'd consider that generational money. You sign a contract for 28, $30 million guaranteed. If you're not a buffoon, like you turn that into generational money. But the reason Josh Allen is never going to think twice about buying anything the rest of his life is because of the last two contracts he signed. And I think if you can think big picture, which it's very hard as a young person, it's very hard as an agent. Like that's the one thing NBA people are pretty good about. Like you hear all these players because their agents are telling them second contract, second contract, second contract. In football, and part of it is the nature of the beast, how fast you can get hurt, how quick things change. The league stands for not for long. That there are a lot more variables working against players. One, it's just the likelihood of a guy hitting is low, but we don't talk a lot about the second contract. It's like get in the league, just figure out how to play, and just try to become a good player. And then like 3 or 4 years in, then we start talking about it. But for the most part, you would rather slip 4 or 5 spots, right? Like if you're a guy, it's like, oh, you could go to the Jags at 5. Well, would you be better off falling to like 11 and going to play for Kyle Shanahan and the Niners? What do you think the answer is? Now, it's going to cost you some money, but for the health and the long-term future of your career, like if you're Mason Graham, the defensive tackle from Michigan, or Will Howard, I'm just choosing some random guys, or Jalen Walker, the pass rusher from Georgia, would you rather go 5 overall to Jacksonville, or would you rather end up playing for the 49ers? Hell, even the Dallas Cowboys. Like the Dallas Cowboys are 12. Say what you want about the Dallas Cowboys. They might let you down in the playoffs. They've been pretty good in the regular season over the course of the last decade. And if you're good, they pay you a shitload of money on your second contract. And you end up making more because you're playing for them. Like, I know this. Of all the teams drafting high, I would like refuse to go to the Jacksonville Jags. Not because I don't like Tony Baselli. Seems like a great guy. The young GM with great hair, I'm sure he's smart. Liam Cohen said Duval is pretty funny, but that is a place where careers go to die. When it comes to college basketball and March Mania, one thing is for sure: nothing's for sure. Upsets, buzzer beaters, Cinderellas, top seeds going home early. It's all gonna happen. Bet the unexpected. Every upset, every day with DraftKings Sportsbook. With live betting, exclusive content, promos, and parlays, DraftKings is the ultimate college basketball destination for March. Ready to make your first bet? Check out matchups and pick a team to win. It's that simple. First time, here's something special just for you. New DraftKings customers bet 5 to get 200 in bonus bets instantly. Bet the unexpected with DraftKings Sportsbook. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app. Use the code JOHN, that's J-O-H-N. That's code JOHN for new customers to get 200 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. One hot topic right now is, I think 7 of the 16 teams in the Sweet 16 or the SEC. I think I heard someone between the Big Ten, the SEC, and the Big 12. 15 of the 16 teams are teams from those conferences, and then Duke. And it's like, well, the death of the little guy. And a lot of it revolves around NIL. And we've talked a lot about this in football. NIL, NIL, NIL. I talked to someone in the business, and it's been reported on. It's hard for me to follow, but it looks like over the course of the next 12-ish months, there will be some consistent revenue sharing when it comes to the Power Four programs. You will have a salary cap. I'll just pick a number, $20 million. And Georgia will have the same salary cap as Minnesota, will have the same salary cap as Washington, as Texas Tech. And you just have to allocate who you pay. Now, the NIL will still exist. I mean, technically, it exists in the NFL, right? There's a salary cap, and then there's the NIL. But the teams don't deal with the NIL. Allstate does, Game Time, whoever your big sponsor is, pays the players on the side, and that's out of the team's hands. Basically, they just have to take care of your salary, like the teams. We all know the NIL and the shadiness is still going to exist in college. If you don't think it will, you're extremely naive. But I do think when you look at the reason that all these teams the last couple of years, the little guy's fucked. And I think when you look at the power or the playoffs in college football in the final 12, it's going to consistently be the same teams and the same group of, let's say, I don't know, 15, 18 teams year after year after year. The only reason they allowed Boise, that represented the non-Power Four, to be in the playoffs, the highest rated non-Power Four team moving forward, is so they didn't get sued. They actually don't want that team there. But it's always going to be Ohio State, Michigan, Bama, LSU, Georgia, Texas, right? Oregon, Washington, SC. It's going to be the same group of teams with the occasional random from one of those conferences. Like this year, ASU. Next year, could be Oklahoma State. But whatever, they're going to keep it in the family. And the reason is, I'll never forget, I had been at Fresno State for a couple months. I got there in the summer after I graduated from school. And then basically training camp hits and boom, we're just playing the season. And I remember thinking it was so cool going to meetings and just, it's like, God, I kind of made it. Like, this is badass. Going from Cal Poly, it felt like I was in the NFL. And either our second game of the season or third game of the season, we were playing UCLA. And Pat Hill, the coach, then walked into the meeting room. He was really good. I would say addressing the team and just on Sunday leading, because NFL Sunday is like the college football Sunday is the equivalent of an NFL Sunday or Monday or Tuesday when you address the team about the future opponent and you kind of go over the previous game because you just played on Saturday. And I remember we were about to play UCLA, who's Rick Neuheisel was the coach, and Coach Hill looked at the entire room, and the majority of kids on the team, I would say at that time, probably close to 95+%, maybe like 98, 99% of the kids were from California. And probably half the kids on the team were either from Southern California or somewhere in the Central Valley, Fresno South. And he said, raise your hand if UCLA offered you a scholarship. And like Ryan Matthews raised his hand and maybe like one other guy. So in a room full of 100 guys, and at the time we were a top 25 team, and like two or three guys raised their hand. And so when you think about these programs, when they're, even if the NIL didn't exist, what really changed the game is the transfer portal allowed guys to switch schools without having to sit out. So like Ashton Genty last year, he's an outlier. When I was at Fresno, Boise State was a power. And by the time Kellen Moore's class of guys were NFL eligible and we're all going to go to the draft, I think 11 or 12 of his senior years, starting 22, got drafted. Well, what are the chances in 2025 that those guys would have lasted that long? They would have been offered scholarships to places they were never offered scholarships to. And let's face it, when Coach Hill goes, how many of you in this room were offered to UCLA? And only three people had raised their hand. Well, if 50 guys in the room had actually been offered scholarships to UCLA, guess what? Those guys wouldn't have been at Fresno State. So I think we talk so much about, oh, they're giving them money to leave. Well, if I'm at Boise State, if I'm at Fresno State, hell, if I'm at Texas Tech or Minnesota, and Oklahoma or Texas come calling, or Ohio State or Michigan come calling, or Oregon or USC come calling, I would have transferred even if they're not paying me because I would have probably gone to school there if they would have offered me a scholarship out of high school. That never existed because it wasn't worth Steph Curry, once he becomes a superstar in college at Davidson, to transfer to Duke because he would have had to sit out. Somehow I ended up on Gary Payton's Wikipedia page. For those of you that don't know, if you're younger, Gary Payton was like easily one of the biggest stars of the 90s. You probably saw him on the Michael Jordan documentary. Made him look kind of bad, but Gary Payton was a badass. He went to Oregon State. And while he was at Oregon State, he was like the three-time Pac-10 Player of the Year. By the time he was like a junior, he's a consensus All-American. He's one of the best players in the country at Oregon State. So he, a lot like Steph Curry, it's clear, one of the best players in the country at this little school. Well, in 2025, maybe Gary Payton, because not every guy is mature enough to go play for Nick Saban or John Calipari or Coach K or Kirby Smart. Some guys take a year or two to develop college football or basketball. And by the time they're a freshman or a sophomore, kind of pops and they look like, damn, like Ryan Matthews looked like an NFL running back when he was 16 years old. Some guys like Ashton Genty, it takes them a couple years. And then by the time you're a sophomore, you're like, holy shit, this guy's one of the best players in the country. It is just very difficult when you're at a smaller place and someone calls you and says, hey, we want you to be the starter at Oregon and you're playing at San Diego State, for them not to say, at least be very interested. And then when you factor in the money, it's borderline impossible to say no. I think we have seen two recent examples in Genty and in Drake May that are complete outlier situations. For the most part, moving forward, when you get guys like at second and third tier programs get offered by the top 10 programs in the country, they're going to say yes every single time. Because if Drake May, and I think he actually kind of was recruited by Nick Saban out of high school, he's probably a bad example, but Genty definitely had been offered by Texas or Ohio State or Alabama or Georgia out of high school, guess what? Ashton Genty wouldn't have been at Boise State. And the only difference in basketball is so many of the quote unquote NBA prospects only last a year and maybe two. But if it had been when I was growing up and the guys would legitimately stay 2 or 3 years, anyone at a quote unquote smaller school, i.e., Gary Payton, Oregon State, it wouldn't have happened. Kawhi Leonard, Paul George at San Diego State and Fresno State would have lasted there 6 months and they would have been gone. So I think we spend so much time talking about the money, and obviously that is what gets the deal done. But the transfer portal up until the last couple of years didn't exist like it does now. You can just transfer and play immediately. That's a game changer. One other thing, I've seen a lot of people. I don't really care about college basketball. I gamble on it during the during the tournament, but it's not like I watch it during the season. But you just I'm on social media enough. I see the big stories and what matters. And obviously, like I'm sure anyone listening to this saw some of the clips of Dan Hurley. Um, just, I mean, over the course of the year, he's had some comments, called himself the best fucking coach in America. and everyone freaked out about that during the season. I think they weren't getting calls. I mean, he did just win back-to-back national championships. Then he storms off the court this week, and he like Baylor's about to take the court, and he says like, hopefully you guys don't get screwed by the refs. I think he dropped a couple f bombs like we just did. And basically, everyone that talks about sports now is calling him a douchebag and saying that he needs to calm down, and he's just a loser essentially. Even though again he's won back-to-back national championships. If this was the NFL, I would agree. And when Sirianni did some of his stuff a couple years ago, his antics, even this year when he was like screaming at the fans, I think it turned a lot of people off, including myself. And even Sirianni, I think, would have to be the first to tell you, like, yeah, it's a bad look. But in college, like, your coaches need to be the stars because the players don't stay there that long. Even in football, where it's mandated that you stay 3 years. Think of all these superstar players Nick Saban had over the last 15 plus years. I could probably list 25 first rounders off the top of my head with ease, potentially like 30 or 40. Yet the longest they ever stayed was 3 seasons. Nick Saban was there 17. Coach K coached for like 40, 50 years. Same thing with Jim Boeheim. The coaches in college sports are your stars. In the pros, the difference is Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan, Belichick, Andy Reid, Sean Payton. These guys are really famous and they make a lot of money, but they aren't even remotely close to as famous as these superstar players. Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, you name it. Why? Because those players are in the league for 15 years, 2 decades, a long time. So when you look at college, like I need some big personalities as coaches. That's the way the business works. I'm glad Dan Hurley is a nut job. You know what? We need more nut jobs at coach in football and in basketball. They are the big personalities. So, like, I understand people being turned off by it. I don't really care. But if you don't understand the importance of having some crazies who are great, right? If you're just crazy and not winning, no one cares. This guy just went on one of the greatest 2 year runs in the history of the sport. And I promise you this, like, they ain't going to be down for long. And here's the other thing. They were toe to toe with Florida that many consider, beside Duke, the best team in the tournament. So I like Dan Hurley. I find him enjoyable. Last but not least, CBS made a change. Well, today Jim Nance he announced. I just saw the headline. I'm like, whoa, Jim Nance is going to quit the Masters in 2026. I just got out of the steam room. I'm just soaking. There's this chair outside the steam room. I try to sit there for like 5 minutes with like a little after a little executive workout and just sweat out all my toxins in the sauna. They say like for big health benefits, you stay in 30 minutes. I mean, once you get to like 15, 16, 17 minutes at 180 degrees, it takes some mental fortitude to last in there. I try to make it like 20. I'm scrolling, not proud, but scrolling, and I see Jim Nance. He's going to retire from calling the Masters. So that probably means if he's not calling the Masters, he's definitely not going to be calling NFL games. Like how much long? We only got Jim Nance till 2026, and then I did a double take. Jim Nance is going to retire in 2036. So he's given us essentially like 11 year, 10 plus more years of NFL seasons and then one extra master. So we got some time. Jim just wanted to let everyone know we got a decade plus, then I'm going to retire. Thanks. Thanks, Big Jim. But CBS, let's face it, can be a little stiffer. It's not exactly, I would say Fox is the more risque network. Definitely allows you to push a little more, push some envelopes, and just feels a little edgier. CBS, when you just in terms of their coverage of NFL, of college football, of golf, it's just a little tighter. Now, I think as time goes on and management changes, maybe they can loosen up a little bit. But I would say definitely it's the conservative side when it comes to sports. And JJ Watt, who I actually think has done an incredible personality pivot over the course of the last 5 or 6 years. I remember early on, I remember the Pardon My Take guys used to rip him, and he just felt a little douchey. And he's even gone on them and like laughs about it now. And I've seen watch some interviews with him with McAfee. He just seems like he's lightened up a lot and seems like a very enjoyable guy. And I think these jobs, and I totally understand CBS. you always got to be every 10, 15, 20 years, kind of got to rotate some new blood in. And lately they've done some of that, right? Getting Matt Ryan involved, getting JJ Watt involved. And listen, I totally understand big names and want to get some stardom involved. And it's cool. You get the number two job at CBS if you're JJ Watt. You are going to be calling games that millions of people are going to be watching. I mean, you're going to be calling Chiefs games, you're going to be calling Bills games, you're going to be calling Ravens games and Steeler games and Raider Charger game. I mean, you're going to be doing some big games in the AFC. So congratulations to him. It's going to be cool. I do think there one thing I think we really yearn for in just society now is authenticity. And I do think it has been difficult for some of these. Like I knew JJ or Drew Brees was going to be bad. I'm like, he's just not going to be able to do it. I don't want to say I saw Brady coming from a mile away, but early on it was clear like it's really hard for him to pivot from like corporate Brady on the camera to like what Brady's like, just kind of hanging it. And maybe that's kind of morphed into the same guy, but it's just kind of gone and it's just kind of weird, and it's very difficult for these guys to kind of be entertainers like John Madden or John Gruden because they're just not. That's not really their thing, but they are so close to so many players because they're recently retired and they know so many coaches is like they're kind of hesitant to do the Troy Aikman, which I think most of us on the couch when we're watching our team, when we're playing fantasy, when we're gambling. I mean, a huge reason the NFL is king by a mile is because of the consumer. Like we get animated and we get worked up. And I've never been like, if a guy fumbles, like people fumble. If a guy drops the ball, guy drops the ball. Like it's football, it's hard. But I think sometimes they're very hesitant to be critical of pretty basic things. It's why I think Troy Aikman is really separated from the pack. I don't know how old Troy is now, but he's been doing this for multiple decades. And whatever Tony Romo got paid, it clearly lit a fire under his ass. And Troy will just let it rip. And honestly, I think it's very relatable as just like he's saying what I would be saying on my couch. And I just hope these guys can strike a balance because I think it allows you to be much better when you can just be real about what you're watching. Because that's how they would talk when the camera was off. If they were just watching the game with their buddy, if they were just watching the game with their former teammates, if they were just having a beer, watching Monday Night Football, that's how they would talk. Yet when the camera comes on, they act like a completely different person. So I just hope he can strike some balance of just like it's okay. You don't have to shit on everybody every day, every time. Like that's not what I'm trying to say. But I think there's just this like overemphasis on like I'm not going to say anything bad about anybody. We're going to try to keep a glass half full, positive outlook on the whole thing. It's like that's not how people talk when they watch the game. And back to football being so popular, like every single person I watch a game with or have over the course of my adult life, we all end up kind of having the same conversations. Like, what the fuck is that coach doing? What a terrible play call. That's how the people that are providing all the money sitting on their couch talk. Yet it's very rare to hear people on television talking like that. Because, like, well, I see what he could have done there. You might want to. It's like, no, come on, man. So I'm rooting for JJ. And listen, I'm not expecting him to just come out the gates, guns blazing, blasting people. But I think we need more of people that are just willing to talk like what we're all seeing because we all see it. And I think people are very, very hesitant now uh, to say anything outside of the little like, this is not going to ruffle any feathers. It's like, I'd like you to ruffle a few feathers.